Welcome to the studio. The Hot Topics Roundtable is the disruptive workforce. And my question to you all is, how have you seen your teams evolve in the way they work over the last 5 years? It's been a period of a lot of change.
My role's changed itself in the last 5 years, but I think one of the general changes I've seen is you've gone away from having a team that's based in one physical location working 9 to 5 to people who are spread all over Europe in my case, all over the world in many cases, and working different times and working more flexibly.
I mean, banks are used to having people in different territories and working different kinds of shifts. Have you seen similar changes or not, Paul?
Yeah, I think that it's a combination. So on one side, we're seeing more flexible workplace, so people can work today from anywhere in the world, no? Because it's all more supported by technology, and especially there are more platforms to collaborate and work in a much more flexible way, so you don't need to be physically somewhere to interact with other people. On the other side, for us, it's also very critical to become closer to the customer, and there are lots of technologies today that allow you to understand better what customers want and how you can design better for customers. No? So I think that for me, thinking about the future of the workplace is also thinking about how you work around the customer and how you think about what are the things that will be changing for your customer experience.
You make a very good point about the tools that enable these kinds of changes, and we will flesh that out a bit more during the discussion. At Tata Steel, have you seen the workforce change the way they work over the last few years?
Of course, we've seen lots of changes like everybody else, but fundamentally with steel, it's kind of technically and physically intensive, and so the people come to the plant. It's extremely capital intensive. So you can't work from home and make steel. That's a bit of a challenge. Yeah? So we haven't seen that change as dramatically as perhaps other industries, and often it's quite challenging when you're kind of bringing people into the organisation. If they have an expectation of flexible working, etc., then that's not going to be the case for everything. Of course, within a white collar context, we've seen the same sort of changes as everybody else. When we made just skip onto the tool for a second. When we recently changed our Skype for Business capability, we started that as a trial in 2013, I think. And by the time we finished the trial, I think we had about 4,500 users on a test pilot server. So it grew without any promotion whatsoever. So people, if you have the right tool, people will collaborate and it will help them to work flexibly.
Do you agree, Lauren?
Yeah, absolutely. And as we see, so I work with lots of organisations. I'm in a small company, but I work with lots of organisations and seeing lots of different trends. But obviously we're seeing younger people coming to organisations demanding different experience, so a much more flexible way of working. In fact, we were discussing earlier about how younger people are sort of thinking about the impact on climate change on their part of the organisation and the implications that's having for sort of technology, which is really interesting. But I think one of the interesting trends that I'd like to highlight is where organisations, technology organisations, are dispersing into the business, either formally or informally. And the most extreme example I've seen recently is actually organisations reshaping them in agile fashion entirely, and the technology people being dispersed into agile teams within organisations. And I found that fascinating as a new thing, a new trend.
Anyone else here? I mean, I saw you nodding when Laura was talking about the agile.
One of the pieces of the transformation that Tata Steel is currently undergoing is about the transformation of the workplace, etc., and the adoption of agile techniques that we've seen in IT. Can we roll them and use those techniques across other areas within our customer account teams, within our engineering teams, within our manufacturing teams, etc.? And that model will work so far, maybe not all the way for everything, but if you look at the need you mentioned earlier about getting that customer centricity and close to the customer. So for us, we've been looking at customer teams who can make all the decisions we need for the customer within a marketing context, within a delivery context, within a billing context, etc., and have that within one team who can make their own decisions about the customer rather than being in kind of functional silos. So that's a very live thing for us right now. Actually.
I think it's a very interesting point. I think one of the things where this kind of thing goes wrong is if a company decides we want to work in a more flexible way, we want to spend less money flying people around, so we're going to implement a corporate-wide VC solution, video conferencing solution. And it's given to the technology teams, and they decide on a solution and then roll it out. But they've missed the most important step, which is finding out what their users need. And if you're a legal firm, you should be really talking to the lawyers and what do they need from a collaboration platform? What do they need from the tools, the technology tools we're giving them? And you spend more time on that and less time designing the system, and then choose the system that actually matches what your users need. In most companies, the technologists aren't the users; they're the facilitators. So.
We've touched a bit on flexibility and kind of the younger generations of workers demanding flexibility. What are the changes in the workforce that mean they need this flexibility, or they think it's their right, and that makes the organisation employing them have to change the way they work?
I think it's interesting. I think it's part of it is what I talked about earlier with the way companies work internationally is changing. I think there's also, I was listening to some people earlier today in the room upstairs, and they were fractional CTOs. I've never heard that phrase before today.
I've never heard it either. What is that?
I heard it earlier, so I'm probably not the right person to explain it. But it's, if you're a small company but you need a high-level technical leadership, but you don't need it all the time. It's someone who works there 3 days a week, for instance, or works for a fixed amount of time. And I thought it was a really fascinating development that I'd never come across. And there's more and more people who are working in that way, who are not coming to an office every day and sitting in front of a computer, or coming to a factory every day and building microphones or steel. I read an article in a magazine on an aeroplane somewhere that there's a young couple who don't have a fixed home. They travel around the world and they work remotely all of the time.
What about the gender balance of the workforce? That's obviously been a factor in terms of flexibility.
Oh, it's inevitable, isn't it? She says, turning to the woman on the table, but not having any personal experience. But it's inevitable, our gender balance is improving gradually, and that will have an inevitable effect. But then so too is our acceptance that, men that are having families are also having equal opportunities to take, flexible working. So it's not purely about women per se, but from my viewpoint, younger people, I do a lot of work with younger people in sort of universities and things, and they just have a better appreciation than my generation for work-life balance. They're more interested in the intellectual contribution they're making and the outcome of that intellectual contribution, rather than when I remember being their age, sort of turn up to work 9 to 5 or more, and it being quite factory process. Whereas I think the younger generation are more creative and have a better appreciation for getting that balance between contribution, but also their home life, their work life as well.
It's not about a generational thing necessarily. With our teams we have in Holland, for example, we've had a long history there of kind of flexible working, with specific days, and not taking off a Monday because it's a long weekend. It's a Wednesday, because on a Wednesday afternoon they could be doing at a kind of university place, or they might be doing handball training or something. It is a complete So there's I noticed that working between Holland and the UK, the difference in Holland versus the UK in terms of the acceptance of that piece and the work-life balance. So it's not just about kind of the gender piece or the age piece, it's also a little bit about kind of where you sit. I think that's for me, and connecting with that, when we talk about flexibility, there are lots of things. For me, technology just is an enabler to let people work in a different way, and I think that today there are new generations that are expecting those things as a starting point to have a working relationship with someone, But what we're seeing more and more, and especially when you are working more on the customer experience or designing new services or products for customers, is empowerment. So what they expect is to work in environments where they can take decisions and they are empowered to own those products and services and decide how to drive things forward. And especially when you try to combine that empowerment within a regulated industry like we are, is you need to create a framework combining agile and other ways of working that allows new generations to work in a flexible way, so they can take decisions every day and they feel that they are empowered to drive the business forward. Because what we're seeing is that they are expecting technology as the basics covered, but on top of that they expect to be able to have that flexibility in the workplace to decide how to create new products and services.
I think that's a really good point. I think some of hopefully, my hope is that the tools that we're creating to enable one type of flexible working then makes it a lot easier to do other things. If we create a tool to allow someone to work remotely, that then enables greater diversity in the workforce. Certainly in my industry, we have a bit of an issue with the gender balance. There's lots of middle-aged guys in the business, not enough women. Having said that, my company CEO is actually a woman. But if we can enable, produce the tools for one kind of flexibility, makes it easier to do other things. And then moving away from a 9-to-5 based, presence-based measurement of how people are achieving, where we can, obviously not everywhere. Then makes it easier to measure people on task and completing actual doing work rather than just being present.
Of course, sometimes the flexibility is imposed on the workforce, isn't it? I mean, if we think about the gig economy, we've seen court cases where contractors have challenged the idea that they're not an employee. How is that affecting other industries aside from organisations like Uber, for example, or I don't know, Deliveroo, or some of the brands we know employ lots of contractors who are not their employees? Do you think that model is a bit discredited now, or is that idea?
I don't know. I think we do see. I don't know if you guys agree, but there's a lot of organisations that aspire to some of the things that Uber and Deliveroo are doing. So some of the changes they've been able to make in sort of speed of time to market and things like that. A lot of organisations, commercial organisations, probably appreciate some of the benefits there. Probably more, the consumers are probably a little bit more uncomfortable with Uber and those kinds of organisations treating the employees the way they do. But from my perspective, I see there being great transformations in time to market and delivering services to clients that they really want to consume, and a lot of businesses looking quite enviously upon those organisations, saying it'd be great if we could do some of that as well.
Yeah, it clearly differs between the sectors. So we're in a very much a B2B context. Yes. So the kind of there's no demand to kind of scale up or scale down at high speed. So the concept of agency people to deliver our steel when required, that just you wouldn't do that kind of thing. You need long-term logistics partners who have the right boats, have the right type of handling equipment, who don't damage the product when it's being moving around. And similarly, even in food distribution, you want regulations, you want standards, and you want these kinds of things. So it will be a growing trend, but I doubt if it becomes the dominant trend. That's what I would feel, because there's too many other supply chains that actually have a completely different outlook on what they cost at basis or what the service requirement is going to be.
There's another dominant.
Yeah.
Oh, go ahead.
No, I was going to say that for me, it depends about the skill set that you are trying to bring on board. No? So, for example, for us, when we work on UX and designing interfaces, sometimes it's good to have people that is at the same time working in other industries or companies, because they bring completely different angle to what you are doing. No? So if you have someone that has recently been designing the Deliveroo app experience, that can help you do something in terms of how to open up a new account into the mobile app and bring that thinking into what you are doing, it helps. And sometimes it's on those skills, it's crucial to have people that is not working full time for the same company every day, because if not, they will be so much driven by about what happens in their industry. No?
What about changes in the workforce, in that there may be less of an appetite to have one job for their entire life, or one career? I know that different organisations around this table today. Certainly in the industry I've worked in media, there's a lot of movement. Would you say that many people today now expect to be able to move around, get some training, then they move somewhere else? That organisation then has to train somebody else up. How's that affecting your organisations, or is it?
I think it's a real mix. I mean, my company's 95 years old, and we've got a lot of people who have been there a very long time, in excess of 40 years. I've been there about 18 months. So I think it's good to be able to do both. But I think one of the challenges with a more mobile workforce, and going back to a technology angle, is you've got to have systems that are easy to use. If you've got people who are coming out, either for temporary contracts or only for a short period, you can't spend half the time training them how to use your completely niche video conferencing solution or ERP or whatever. I think one of the expectations from the younger workforce is that stuff just works. You don't have a manual with your iPhone. You figure it out, And I think one of the things that my industry's failed at historically and has got a lot better at is making a user interface that is intuitive. I think if you're in a meeting or any kind of work interaction, you're conscious of the technology, something's wrong. If you're in a meeting and you're conscious of the technology, something's gone wrong, any more than you'd be conscious of the carpet. So I think that's one of the challenges.
Are we conscious of the carpet in this room?
It's a lovely carpet.
We're a well-established, mature industry, etc. So and going through a lot of change and continue to go through that change in terms of the size and scale, footprint, locations and the markets that we serve. But what we generally see is that people have been with us for quite some time. Actually, in a lot of our new recruits, you have people who are quite excited to join us, and they do stay for some time. We have turnover the same as at most other companies, but a lot of the graduates I meet are in the interviews, etc. One of the things they talk about is the ability to have the career. I joined some 30 years ago, and I was in sales, I was in procurement, and recently in IT. So it's like a mini gig economy within an organisation of scale. If you join a medium company or a small company, then there's a point at which if you want to get on, you're going to move on. So I don't know whether the gig economy and people want to have multiple careers. Some will, some won't, and some will like the stability that a single company offers.
I think for me it's a combination. So on one side is if you want to stay many years in the same company because you want to grow in the career ladder in that company. But then when you think about industries, every industry is getting massively transformed right now. So if you look at the skills that were required in banking 10 years ago, and the ones you require right now are completely different. So today is about data, it's about digital, it's about completely different new skill set compared to the kind of people we were employing 10 years ago. For me, is if you want to stay in the same company for all your career, you need to get yourself refresh every 5-10 years to be able to do the jobs that the company will require in the future.
Definitely. We the last 2 to 3 years we've been developing capabilities for the Azure platform and data and analytics, etc. The teams on that, quite a number of them, are people that previously worked in the data center and had that experience, but have picked up these new tools and have trained themselves, and they are incredibly valuable to us in terms of what they now do. The other thing that I think has changed in the nature of work is maybe our company is not as large as it was before, but certainly from an IT context and some other areas, also in our product development where we link to universities. So you're getting that flexibility and you're getting that diversity of opinion, if you like, because you're using third parties, you're using contractors, you're using universities to give you ideas or to give you concepts. We have the University of Delft in Holland. We are part of one of the member companies of their startup network. And one of the startups was with us this week talking about virtual reality, and they're running training tools for us. That's not something we otherwise may have done some time back. So there's different ways of getting, that diversity into the organisation, I think, and getting the different ideas.
There's lots of future gazing going on here today at the studio, but outside, lots of people are talking about whether some jobs will disappear completely because of robotics and AI, technology to replace human labour completely. What other skills does the workforce need to take on in order to migrate to this new reality where some jobs will disappear, others may be created?
I think one of them is actually people skills. If there's going to be less, repetitive manual labour, which I would imagine where will be the first place the automatic systems will take over. The bits that's going to be more valuable is what people can do, and that's dealing with people and being flexible and learning and not expecting to start a job and do the same job, to Paul's point, for your whole career. You've got to be ready to learn and progress and change, and the people who do that will succeed.
We were talking about them earlier as in the immediate term, so I'm talking 2, 3, 4 years time, is that really we're talking about cobots, that is bots that collaborate with you rather than take over your job. And that's probably the reality for many businesses and most workers, right? So, and that's about, the discussion today has been about adapting to that change and helping people consume that as the next step rather than a radical disappearance of everyone's jobs per se, but actually allowing people to leverage automation to work smarter and be more efficient, but not disappearing altogether. And the reality over the next few years, I think, is that we won't see most businesses eradicating people, but leveraging the benefit where it makes sense to do so and it's economical to do so. And there's, in this society, we've got a reliance on humans to make decisions and ethical decisions. And I think the sort of backstop is we're probably uncomfortable still allowing robots to make full decisions end to end, and therefore there's still a need for humans somewhere. We're not quite at Skynet yet.
That's certainly, one of the discussions about driverless cars. And some of the tests are, will the driverless car run over the person with the pram to avoid a dog that runs out of the road or something like that? But people do think, Skynet, it is going to be this dystopian future.
Yeah, this for me, my vision is that it will make a smarter workplace, and it links with what we discussed before. So if you have a robot or something helping you on your day-to-day activities, it will make the workplace smarter and let you focus on the things that really are valuable for your customers or the relationships with your employees, no? And we are seeing a lot of how you can augment people through technology, no? Because if you look at we do many things every day that we could stop doing if there's technology doing that on our behalf. And I think that for me is more how we can amplify humans with technology and let them focus on the right things, no? And with the example of the driverless cars, I mean, if you look at one of the main reasons that Google started investing in driverless cars is because they know that if you are not driving the car in that half an hour commuting, you are going to be consuming Google services. So it's the example of if you have a technology doing something on your behalf, you'll be spending time on things that really matter to you. No?
But actually, to play devil's advocate, it's a great opportunity to slim your workforce down, isn't it? I mean, we've seen in banking, for example, fewer branches on high streets. Are those staff replaced elsewhere, or is it a new model for an industry when robots or cobots start kind of becoming a reality?
I think it's a combination. So on one side is you are using technology to let the people you have today invest more time in managing customer relationships, because we still have a lot of people coming to branches to do transactional things, and you are using people to support those transactions that could be spending time in terms of advising customers or helping them. And at the same time is using these robots to help your existing employees to provide a better service to your customers. No?
It is a challenge, though. I mean, you have to be real. You have to be real about it. And if you look back over the last 30, 40, 50 years of industrial output, etc., you've added robots. So if you look to the car plant, robots will be handling all the paint shop activity. They'll be doing the stamping activity. They'll be doing the transfer activity. What's that yielded? There are fewer people working in those factories, but they are then working somewhere else, or they're retired, whatever it's going to be. But
or perhaps there's a new model.
Well, it's a new model, but the upside, the paint shop is a pretty dangerous place to be. The factory environment is pretty difficult, kind of thing. So you've removed serious harm in a number of areas as well. So that you can't get away from the fact, I guess, that people want to have work. So you've got to find that within the total economy somewhere and within the company capabilities as far as you can. And as we say, reskilling, retraining. If we think about, I think you were kind of hinting at earlier, the cobot piece is good because you're going to need people to train the robots and to manage the algorithms if you go that far, etc. And people who understand the work, they understand the consequences of it, they'll take it as far as they can. In 12 months, we've done about 9,000 transactions from a standing start last summer to today, where we're putting out IT services in an automated way, passwords, software deployment, compliance checks, health checks, etc. What that's done is taken away so much noise and stress from the frontline service team that now they're thinking about, okay, this is what we do next, this is what we can do here. And so it completely transforms their day job, So it's had
a real positive effect.
It has had a positive effect.
So if you take away the drudgery, it allows people to be more creative.
Yeah.
And the end result's better, hopefully.
Could it lead to a future in which instead of people retiring later and later, actually we retire earlier and have more leisure because the work's being done by someone else, and then the economy has to cope with.
That would be
I mean, but you know, we're in an election campaign at the moment, and there's been talk about a 4-day week, for example, and that's been scoffed at actually in a lot of places. But you know, is there a possible future that we might be heading towards where it is realistic that a lot of people don't work full time and they have more leisure, and that is supported economically at a state level?
I could see a future, and that's something I actually would be quite good. You don't have a retirement date if you don't want it, but you go from working 5 days a week to 4 days a week to 3 days a week to doing occasional projects. You know, it depends if you're on your skill set and your appetite for it. But I can certainly in my case I could see myself petering out rather than retiring. I may
You
have
don't
to.
look like you're petering out.
I may have to think of a better name. Yes.
Do you see yourself petering out? I mean, you've done a lot of jobs for Tata. Will you peter out?
No, I hope not. I hope not. And certainly, every time I talk about early retirement, I get a strange look from my wife that says,
That ain't happening.
That's not happening. No. So no, I wouldn't want to do that personally. But I can see what people. I have colleagues who do. I have colleagues who are currently retiring from the organisation in the mid-50s, and they're saying, yeah, okay, this is 30, 35 years. I'm going to do something else. This is what I now want to do. So they have that position. I think, but it also comes back down to your economic capabilities. If we probably
Yes.
some of us, all of us have had families, have taken them to Disneyland and in the parks in Florida or something. If you look at who's driving the trucks to get you back to the car park in the evening, it's generally not students. It's people of 60, 70, 80 years old actually who are working, and there you've got no economic kind of baseline. So it's a necessity. And the Industrial Revolution, you had people working 7 days, then we moved back to 6 days, then you move back to 5 days, etc. So is it just a progression? Probably. But then you're on to scarcity of supply. We can't have a 4-day NHS if we have the same number of doctors with the same number or an increasing number of emergency cases or operations to do. So demand and supply, unfortunately, I did economics, it all comes back to, it will come back to the economics of the situation.
I'm going to throw one other word in, which is affecting the economics of the situation, which is Brexit. How's that going to impact the workplace? That's a major disruption in the work, in the field of employment, isn't it?
It's a very, very hard question. It's something we've spent a lot of time. We work in most countries in the world, and there's the short-term economic impact that many of us are seeing right now, and the revenue flow has become more lumpy. I mean, our company's in a fortunate position that we're in a growth mode, carrying on with that. But what does it do to supply chain, and not just Brexit, but the other trade issues that are going on? It's more work and uncertainty around businesses.
And around the workforce as well. We often hear from employers that there are major skills gaps that are a problem for the UK economy. What skills are missing, and how will Brexit exacerbate that?
I think that for us, in the banking industry, we are seeing the challenge already today without the Brexit. So there's a big competition in London, especially in terms of fintech and banking and bringing the right talent and the right skill set. It could be around design, around developers and different skills. We think that with Brexit, this will just get more challenging, because you will have potentially people moving to other places. But the challenge is already today here happening in terms of talent. And London has more offers of specific jobs than the people that is applying for those jobs. And I think that this challenge will just become bigger as London becomes a big fintech capital.
It's the opposite of the gains you make through by improving diversity and working flexibly. That widens your recruiting pool. Restricting the people that can come to the country narrows it, so it's just going to make it worse. There's no way it can make it better.
Speaking from a semi-startup and relatively small company compared to the others around the table. So I've designed and built a company that is not dependent on the UK as a startup. I see myself very much as European/global in attitude, and I don't belong to the UK, and neither does my business. And so we are recruiting people and building business in country. and being very diverse in our workforce, and actually building a flexible workforce based on associate type model rather than big benches of peoples in countries, specifically to get around and away from the problem that is workforce problems to do with Brexit or any other kind of migratory problems. And for me, it's about putting the right people with the right skills in the right job at the right time. So flexibility plus getting the right people in the right place. And for me, the whole Brexit thing has been an unholy distraction for business. Either way, doesn't matter which way which your opinion is. The actual distraction for businesses and the ongoing length of that disruption, I think, has been really impactful on the workforce. And working with a lot of particularly European-based businesses looking in on us, they're sort of really sad that this situation has occurred, and it reflects badly on us. And so I'm sort of disappointed by that and the impact it's having in business, not only on workforce but in disruption factor. Seems somewhat frustrating for everyone involved.
The whole uncertainty piece is the killer.
Correct,
We rolled up changes for a no deal, then were about to deploy them, then held them back, and then came back, and that kind of the amount of effort and the willpower and the waste of time. Again, trying not to say which way one would go on Brexit or no Brexit, etc. I suppose if you come back to the point about disruption and what may happen, if Brexit itself may or may not determine what our workforce size is, but the workforce demographics are changing as well anyway, and the availability of labour is changing. So how are we going to pick apples anyway if we have fewer number of youngsters per se who are fit to do that? We're going to need robots to do this, or we're going to need machinery to do that. It's the same as the Industrial Revolution. There wasn't enough labour. What happens is you get an industrialization capability come in. You moving from merchant to this. If we look at some of the things we were doing for no deal, it kind of makes you think, the entire process here is not that good. So what does the digital capability offer, and how could you get touchless if you're not in a single market? One would hope that if there's anything that comes of it, it's that which sort of says, okay, it is about what the innovation can do. It is about this. The idea that we can go off and trade in different markets and opportunities around the world, less so. Our market, our physical, we talked earlier, which is a physically and technically intensive steel product. It doesn't travel particularly well. You can't find markets far away because you're destroying value the further you go. But in the context of the supply chains and stuff, does it force us and other sectors? Can it force the pace of technology change? That would be the one thing that you would hope for to come out of the situation, whichever way we go, whatever type of deal we get.
Moving away from Brexit, just going back to the idea of how technology is impacting the workforce and how the workforce is requiring different kinds of technology solutions in companies. Do you think boards are doing what Lauren has described? Because Lauren is the CEO, so you can make those decisions and you're highly aware of them. Do you feel that the boards of your organisations fully understand the potential for changes in the workforce to offer opportunities for organisations or threats?
Speaking for my company, I think they're pretty good. I mean, you would hope that from a technology point, we are a technology company, you'd hope they'd get that. But no board can, of any company of any size, can be aware of every challenge of every employee. And I think it's the role of myself and my colleagues in management to raise those challenges up. I'm lucky I work for a company that does react very well to that kind of thing, but we can't sit back as whatever level we're at and expect the board to do it all by themselves. It's a communication challenge part of everything else.
Is it a communications challenge in banking?
I think that boards are becoming also more diverse in terms of bringing different skills into the discussion. I mean, traditionally banks have had very strong financial background people in the boards, and now we are seeing more and more non-executives coming from the technology background and from the innovation background. So on one side you have another kind of thinking in the board in terms of the company. At the same time, I think that as you were saying, I think that the board needs to think about the top metrics of the company, whatever it is, diversity, work-life balance, and all the things that are really going to be helping the company grow. And then it's on the executives to find the ways to transform how the company delivers every day.
Well, we're coming close to the end of our roundtable, but I'd just like to get a summary from each of you of what you feel about the workforce in the future. What do you think is going to be the major change in, say, 10 years or even 20 years? You know, how it's very far ahead. But look into the future for us. The changes you're seeing now, how's that going to change how you operate and what your workforce looks like in, say, 10 years' time?
Well, I mean, for me, I think we've been lucky enough to be starting a business quite recently. So, you know, we don't have too much legacy. We're a services organisation as well, so we're not tied to production and manufacture and factories, etc. But I think it's inevitable. We've got to look to the people that are going to be doing those jobs, and that's not us per se. It's going to be people that are coming up through universities now. And so that has to continue to be frictionless, completely. It has to be continue to be flexible, whatever that means, and it has to be high value. And so technology solutions will inevitably continue to develop that meet that need. And I think that's the only thing we can predict at the moment, because technology changes so fast. Our ability to understand it, consume it, deploy it, and take advantage of it is slower than the technology itself. So I think all we can say is continue to be flexible, frictionless, and certainly a much better appreciation of work-life balance is an inevitable change.
Nicholas, at Tata, you're going through a transformative period at the moment. Yeah. The structure, the headcount is changing at Tata. What's the future?
We're going to have, as you were saying, Laura, the agile way of working, that ability to have smaller teams who are more self-determining in what they do, so to get a faster response to customer requirements, faster response to product development, etc. That's how it's going to be. What I see is a kind of long-term trend within that, alongside that, and we see it with the incoming engineering graduates that we have right now, is a kind of grip of data and a grip of analytics that's going to help them do their job. Our aim would be that we've got so-called digital twin capability. Now I know some companies like Rolls-Royce, etc., with their aero engines have achieved some of these things, but to do it on a huge industrial plant, that would be the goal. So essentially you've got people that are kind of working and testing virtually and then deploying actually, and having the speed to do that for very large industrial applications as well.
Lovely. Rob?
Flexibility, I think.
For you, yes.
I think, I think we're going to be moving into an age where people are working more differently. You know, there are going to be people working in factories, microphone factories, steel factories, whatever, who are working probably in a more traditional way in the fact that they come to the same place and work the same hours. And then more and more people working in different ways, whether they're fractional CTOs, I love that phrase, or just people working in different geographies. And I think from a technologist point of view, we've got to build systems that are almost invisible and just assist and empower people to be productive in whatever way they're working. I think we're at an interesting point right now where technology is becoming more pervasive in the workspace, but it still can be a barrier. You've got to understand how to make it work. That's got to go away. You've got to be able to come to work wherever you work and interact with your colleagues seamlessly and frictionlessly.
And Paul, in banking, are we going to see algorithms taking over from people? Are we going to see robo wealth managers? I mean, what's the future in 10 years' time?
I think that in general, I think that in all the companies we will see a much more empowered workforce. It will be less top-down and more people driving the future of the company, and this links with agile and all the things. I think we're going to see a more tech-enabled workplace, that it's as easy as sending a WhatsApp to a friend. You can communicate in the same way with your colleagues in the company and make things easier. And then, as I said before, I think that we'll have more smart organizations through robotics and technology, helping people focus on the things that really matter in terms of managing customers. No? So less spending time on things that are not adding value to your customers, and using robotics and technology to let people really focus on the right things.
Thank you all very much for a really fascinating discussion.